Welcome back to the Male Vacancy Project podcast. I'm your host, Amadeus. Today I have with me Scott Holmes. Scott and I connected through Colleen Avis, who was the head author on the book that I was involved with called Sacred Spaces Volume 3. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it on my camera. And Colleen connected the two of us because Scott is writing his own book and he's interviewing a bunch of men for it. And Colleen thought that it would be a great idea for Scott to interview me. So we did the interview, we connected, and we thought it would be a great idea to have Scott on my podcast. So here we are. Scott, welcome on.
Hey, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. And by the way, Colleen Avis is a force of nature.
Yes, she is.
She is a primal force. She's one of my favorite people. You can't have a conversation with her without walking away just shaking your head going, wow.
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
So what I do, I'm an intuitive energy practitioner. What does that mean? That means I work with people to get them aligned and grounded and centered so that they can, from that point of reference, they can have their best life. They can make better decisions. They can have a better life. The amount of ways that we kind of, and you work out all the time. And you know when you have an injury, you favor one side, you favor the other, you're not quite walking. I used to have a bad back when I was 25, 30, and I would be in an S shape. And I'd say, yeah, I look right? And people just shake their heads. So we twist ourselves into knots emotionally, spiritually, energetically in order to survive or do what we think is best in this world. And as a reformed people pleaser, I can tell you that my spine and every other part of my body was twisted into knots. So not having that happen and being able to take all the knots out, straighten everything out, and be able to really be solid on your feet changes your whole perspective. And that's the work that I do. You asked about the book. It's funny the way it came about. Bina DeLivio is a psychotherapist up in Toronto. She and I were on a shamanic trip in Peru. And they let us off the bus and they said, go have dinner. So we sat down over a Peruvian pizza. It's not as bad as it sounds, honestly. But we were talking about it, and she said in her practice, she asks every man the same question. When did you become a man? And she found it was so interesting that men had such a hard time answering that question. Some of them had never been asked, never thought about it. Some of them, had said to her, 40, 45 years old, and they just looked at her and said, I don't know if I have gotten there yet. And the funny thing is, when you talk to women over 40, they ask, where are all the men? Because they say that most men are boys in suits, which is an interesting concept, I think.
Yeah.
And when we did that, you answered and asked the questions that very few men under the age of 60 ask themselves. I want you to know how impressed I was with the depth of your understanding, the depth of your inquiry into self, and how much that changes us in our perspective as what is a man. And I've done about a dozen interviews so far. I'm doing 200. And by the way, for anybody that's listening, my email is on there. Tag me. I am looking for men 30 and above. And in the book, we're grouping them 30 to 45, 45 to 60, and 60 and above. Because of the different places that men are in their lives and how they see their lives. So while the book is interesting and important for me, it'll be out in 2026. It's it begs the question about how men see themselves now. Amadeus, we've had those talks where there are so many younger men who just have never had a role model, or if they had a role model, it was absolutely miserable. It was dysfunctional. It was on the negative.
Yeah.
Or they had none, and they were raised by a single mom, which we see more and more nowadays. And moms, they're in survival mode, and they're doing the best they can, but it never replaces that role model that I grew up with, that you grew up with, when you have an intact family, and when there's not so much trauma and chaos and isms that are involved. And that's the hard part. You would ask me about me and my when did I become a man, and I that's you're the first one to ask me that one. And
Am I?
you are. Everybody, I ask everybody the question, but you're the first one to ask me. And I'm going to paint a picture for you. I was 25 years old. I'm working 3 jobs. I got married when I was 19. I had my first daughter when I was 20. By the time I was 25, I had 3 daughters, 3 jobs, and I knew absolutely nothing about life. That's the way I felt. My youngest daughter was 13 months old. She woke up from her nap, and my wife could not get her to speak. She couldn't get her to acknowledge anything. It was scary. She called me and said, I don't know what's wrong with Amanda. We're going to go to the doctor's. And I said, okay, I'll leave from work, and I met her there. As I'm walking into the doctor's waiting room, I see her, and her mouth is twitching. And unfortunately having had a dog that had seizures, I knew kind of where this was going. So I kind of scooped her up. We brought her in the back, and the doctors are looking at me. I said, she's about to have a seizure, and they're like, I don't know how you know that, but okay, come on. Within 10 minutes, she was in full grand mal seizure. Now, this is a kid who's never had any symptom, never had any problems, never had anything else. And she's in full grand mal, and we have the 2 doctors, the 3 nurses that were in this. The entire waiting room was full, and they're trying to calm this grand mal down. They finally got it. They called the ambulance, and they said, we're going into Boston. Now, I live just south of Boston. The doctor left the waiting room full of people, got in the ambulance with my daughter, and drove all the way to Boston. 45 minutes in the back of an ambulance, with me following closely behind in the car. And it was the scariest time of my life. A couple days after she was put into the NICU, which is PICU rather, pediatric ICU. And for anybody who's had anything to deal with a PICU, it is probably one of the scariest places that I've ever been. You have kids, the ages of 3 years old, 2 years old to 3 years old to 15, who are walking the line between life and death. My daughter has got a line. She's got seven lines into her. She's got all of these beeping. Everything is going. And I sent my wife home, and I stayed there. And I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning after trying to sleep on a hospital cot. If you've ever tried it, not fun. And I woke up, and there I was just standing in the middle of the room they had us in, and just looked up and said, okay, whatever you got, please do it to me, not to my daughter. Whatever it is, whatever you need me to do, I'll do it. And that was at 25 years old when I gave up my mortality. In other words, I knew, because before that, life had been great. I'd never had any major tragedy. I didn't lose anybody to death that was close to me. Life was wonderful, and up until that point, I had been led a charmed life. And now my daughter should not survive. And I just gave it up. And that was the moment that I became more of a man than I had ever thought I could be. My daughter did survive, barely. She was basically a quadriplegic afterwards. She was 13 months old when she got sick, and she died when she was 15 years old. Through that time, through the ups and downs, my wife and I were the caregivers, and then she was in a pediatric nursing home. Massachusetts was one of the few that actually had that, and they cared beautifully for her, and she passed at 15 years old. And I always felt that my kids, all three girls, taught me more than I ever taught them. As I was the provider, my role was to provide, to support, to keep safe, all of those things as a man, as a provider, as everything that you ever thought they should be. And in one sense, I always felt that I failed. I know it's hard to explain, but I failed because I could not keep my daughter safe from a disease. And is there anything in this world that I could do? No. It's fate. It's whatever it comes up to be. But between my wife and I, we did the best we could with everything that we had, making decisions. And by the way, for those out there that are caregivers, the men out there, just know that when you're in survival mode, it's okay. You can't be your best self. You can't do those things that you planned on. And there is grief. The grief that you feel that what your loved one can't do anymore. That grief that all those expectations, if you have a child that is involved, multiply involved, handicapped in any shape, manner, or form, their loss of being able to have a full life. I just want to put that out there because it doesn't get said very often. In answer to the question you asked, that's when I feel like I truly became a man, when I let it go. That I didn't have all the answers, that I was not in control anymore, that the only thing that I could do was do the best I could with whatever I was given. And know that whatever it was, I'll walk through fire in order to get it done.
Wow. That's thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me tell the story. Yeah. And this is the thing that I want to put out there. I'm interviewing 200 men, but it's their stories we want to tell. We want to be able to share their thoughts about manhood, about their stories, about what shaped them, what traumas, what challenges they had. We want to be able to share that with the world. Now, we're much like yourself. Amadeus is kind of a unusual name. You're the very first one that I've ever met. So we're asking men what name they want to use for their piece, because we're only using first names. And so there's anonymity with it. And it's a way to be able to tell your story. And is that the way you felt through the interview, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. The whole interview process was very clean. It was very well paced, well timed. The questions were really intuitive in how they flowed into the next from one question into the next one, and really got to the crux of the matter of what you were trying to get out of me, for lack of a better way of saying it, for what you were trying to get out of me. I thought all the questions were really good.
Thank you. We worked really hard on that part of it. and as you know, the questions are everything in an interview, right?
Yeah.
And you supplied me with questions that we could possibly speak about, and that's a great help. It just gives me a point of reference.
Yeah.
The next question you asked was why did I decide to come in and do the work myself? Which I
Yeah.
thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah. What was the catalyst for you diving into your own self growth work?
So here's my story, and it's not short. Um, Thankfully, this enables us to kind of do a deep dive. At
Let's
39
do
years
it.
old, my wife contracted and was found to have breast cancer. She had a modified radical mastectomy, and that started 20-year battle with breast cancer. Uh, there were times when she had chemo. There were times when she had radiation. She was on FDA studies. It had metastasized to her liver later on, her kidneys, and also her brain. And so, as a caregiver, again, my most of my adult life has been as a caregiver, and that was the hardest part because I didn't get to share it. I was the caregiver, and I didn't have. I had that loss of her when she had to retire, when she had to stop driving, when she, that just downward spiral that she had. No matter how hard she fought hard for 20 years. She passed in our home because I had made a promise to her that she would not see in hospital, and that she would not pass there, and she was surrounded by family, and that was the most important part for her. So you ask when I did the work for myself. Well, here I was. I was 59 years old. I was living in an empty house because my daughters had gotten married, they had kids, and they were gone, so all I had was the cat, and he didn't really like long conversations, so I started having them myself. Ended up doing 5 years of weekly therapy, and she was merciless, by the way, thankfully. Uh, the therapist was, there were days I was driving there every Wednesday, once a week. I was driving there after work, and I'd say, "Okay, how can I get out of this one? How can I? How can what excuse can I use? Because I don't know what I'm going to talk about." And she always found that place within me that needed to come out. I did
That's a good
EMDR.
therapist.
Oh, she would pull stuff out I had said 3 years earlier, out of
Wow.
thin air. Yes, this woman was amazing.
That's that's impressive.
It really is. And so, much like being in the army, they don't let you get away with shit. And I didn't get away with a thing for 5 years until finally, after being for 25 years, really being in survival mode and putting on the armor, and the armor getting thicker and thicker and thicker just to survive, to get through each day, to not know when the next shoe was going to drop, whether either my daughter or my wife. That puts you in a certain space. And I always wondered why people couldn't get close to me, by the way. And then I realized I had such thick armor, and I had walls that were so high that I couldn't get out and they couldn't get in. So the
Yeah.
therapy really peeled off all of that armor, one layer at a time. I've often said, and I used to be a salesman on the road, and I drove about 1.5 million miles. And I always said that from my head to my heart was a journey of about 1 million miles, because that's how long it took me to get there. When my wife passed, I didn't know what my feelings were. I didn't know how to deal with them. I didn't know how to express them. They scared the hell out of me. They did, because I kept everything in. I was the rock. I was the strong one. I was the core of the family to hold it together, and I couldn't let down. And being that rock, emotions just get stuffed all the way down. And so
Yeah.
when things would happen, it'd be like, okay, next, let's just deal with this. So the survival. For those of you who've had loss, grief, I do hospice work now in my work. I do Reiki and I do hospice work, and I deal with a lot of grief. A year after my wife passed, I thought I could do it. Nope. It took me about 5 years before I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And I did it for her. But it took a 40-hour course, 40 hours of my time to be able to donate my time to do hospice work. And it's really important. And I've often said that I get more out of the work that I do with end of life than I think I ever am able to give them. It's amazing the clarity people have as they're transitioning. The discussions that we have that you don't normally have, about what they want as a legacy, what they want to leave behind, what they, with their loved ones, what's their regret, what do they think of, the next step. And that, I used to think it took a lot of courage to do that. It doesn't. It takes compassion. If you have the compassion for people, you're able to do that kind of work. And I see nurses who do, hospice work, and it's because they're called to do it. A nurse can do anything. They could go to pediatrics or surgery, or they can do a million things. But these nurses choose to do hospice end of life, and that takes a very special understanding.
Yeah, that's interesting. You've talked a lot about multiple different ways in which a man can be a man, right? Quote unquote, be a man. From the more nurturing side to the more strong armored support, be the rock of the family side. And one of the questions that I want to ask everybody and want to ask you is what does it mean to you to be a man?
The funny thing is, through my life, it's changed, that definition, depending on where I was. But now that I'm on this side, I'm 67 years old, and in going to Peru, and it basically stripped me of just about everything, everything I'd been carrying for years and years and years. And I found, for me, having that masculine energy is holding space for people. I do that with hospice. I do that with the people in my life. I hold the container so that they can do the work they do. When I'm working with clients in energy work, I build a container that they feel comfortable with. I feel very blessed in that a majority of my clients are women between the ages of 30 and 50. And they feel safe with me because I create that container for them. And they are able, in that space, to be vulnerable. Say things that they've told me, things that they've never told anybody or admitted to themselves. And it is breathtaking to see the change within them once they say the words. So for me, holding space in whatever manner that whatever situation you're in, whether it's family, whether it's friendship, whether it's a friend in need, right? Sometimes the best way to be present is just to be there. They say showing up is 75% of life, right? Or more. And just being there. And I remember my 17-year-old grandson was there when my wife was passing, and my wife was downstairs in the living room, and everybody was jumping around. My daughters, in-laws, cousins, everybody was all around, and he came and he sat. Anthony, do you need anything? No, I'm okay. He sat, and he was present, And for a 17-year-old to have that understanding was amazing. I just wondered at it, because here you have people of all ages, up to 80 years old, who didn't get it. And at 17, he understood. And for me, he's one special kid. He just understands it. He's always been that very old soul. I hope I answered your question in that respect.
Yeah, you did.
Okay. Okay. So this is about telling the story, about being a man, right? So my life has been absolutely amazing from start to finish. And I am living my best 18-year-old life. What? When I was 18 years old, I was graduating high school. I wanted to be an author. I wanted to write. I wanted to be creative. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to go to college for teaching. I wanted to be able to travel. I was curious about the world. I was curious about history. I was curious about biographies. I would read incessantly. At 19, I got married. 20, I had my first child. By 25, I had 3 children. So I had little time other than to provide. And then when my daughter got sick, it was provide and take care. When my wife got sick, it was provide, take care, and now take on the responsibilities, the shared responsibilities that we had. It used to be 2 of us, and now it was 1 of us providing all of that. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to do all that stuff. After my wife passed, I was sitting with my my best man at our wedding, and we were sitting across each other from lunch, and we were going to go to college, high school and college, and after college we were going to go to Europe, the 2 of us. You know, the dream, right? Backpacking for months, youth hostels, you know, just do whatever you want to do. So we're
This sounds great.
Except we're 60 years old. So I looked at him, I said, "You want to go?" And he's like, "Yeah, let's do that." So he and I jumped in a Volvo, flew into Munich. I jumped in a Volvo SUV and drove 3,500 miles through Central Europe. We hit 9 countries, and I happened to turn 60 during the trip. We were in southern Germany, and I said, "Hey, Paul, let's do this. Let's plan something special. Tomorrow's my birthday." He says, "Okay." So it was one of the few times we were actually at a hotel, so we had breakfast. We drove into France, Strasbourg, France. Then we had lunch. And then we had dinner in Basel, Switzerland. So I had breakfast in Germany, lunch in France, and dinner in Switzerland. So that was the way we celebrated my 60th birthday.
That's really cool.
So we've traveled. We've gone to the Far East. We went to Bangkok, Cambodia, Thailand. Bangkok, Cambodia, Vietnam. 17-day trip. I've been to Singapore and Malaysia. Wow. I've been to India 2 years ago. Last year it was Peru. And the end of this year it'll be Greece. So the travel is there. And now I get to teach also. With clients, I also do classes locally. And it's about energy, it's about understanding, it's about perspective. I don't know how you feel, but I find that perspective is absolutely everything. How you see something.
Yeah.
Why is it that when a dish breaks, somebody screams, somebody cries, somebody yells, and somebody goes and gets the broom and just sweeps it up and goes, whoops, right? It's all perspective. It's all in the way we see the incident and how it happened, and how we see life. I always find that people who are feel put upon or in a bad place when something even minor happens, they just look up and say, "Hey, what, another thing? Really? This is my life? Dish is breaking." They put that because that's their perspective, right? That's what they do. Yeah. That's how they see life. That's how they kind of interpret everything that happens to them. So the interesting thing about you, at a very young age, you were asking questions I didn't ask till I was almost 60. Okay? That is a lot of respect to you. honestly.
Thanks.
And you have the ability to do that. In doing these interviews, you're giving space to men to hear what needs to be heard. Men don't share. Let's be real. Men don't share. Okay.
That's true.
Here's an example. My wife's oncologist was the head of Mass General. He actually started the breast cancer center there. Beautiful man. And he said, I'm trying to put a support group together for men. He said, I see women all day and their husbands are right there. Nobody asks them about them because the focus is on breast cancer. It's about the women. They're having to raise the children and do the shopping and do the cooking and do the housework and do all of these things, some of which they were never prepared for or had never done, right?
Yeah.
And he said, I want to get a support group going. I said, okay. I scoured the internet. There is one program, one gentleman, and he can get no traction. And I went back to the doctor and I said, okay, you're going to ask 15 men to drive an hour to an hour and a half into Boston, to sit in a room with other men and discuss their feelings while they are in survival mode. Nope, not going to happen.
Yeah.
So how we present ourselves to each other is really, really important. So I don't know if you know about the AA model of having a sponsor. So someone whose wife has been through breast cancer and is on the other side, or somebody whose wife has had breast cancer in his past, would be able to touch base with somebody who's going through it currently. They're the only ones that fully understand what's going on when a husband's wife is undergoing this, between the treatments and what's going to happen and how they handle this and the frustration. And it's really hard when your wife has her head in the toilet, throwing her guts up, and you want to tell her how frustrating it is that you have to do everything. Maybe that conversation won't be had that way. I don't think.
Probably won't go over too well.
No, it wouldn't go over too well anyway, and nobody would even attempt to cross that line, right? But someone who's been through it before, you have a phone call, or you sit down with a beer or a coffee, and you say, "Hey, how's it going? You know, I got to tell you, it's really tough." These are things they're not going to be able to tell their families. Forget anybody else. They can't tell their kids. They can't tell their wife, because we hold things in. Men, as men, we're told, hold it in, baby. You got to be strong. You got to be the rock. You got to do all that. But being able to share that and understand that they're not the only one to ever go through it, because there is such a loneliness. It cuts everything else off when you're caregiving that way. You don't and can't do things that anybody else who's not going through it can do. It is very, very isolating, and you feel alone, no matter how much support you have within your family. So that's the model that I saw being able to work. I actually presented it to Mass General, and they could not see their way through that. It was a way to be able to touch men and connect with men so that they didn't feel alone. So part of that, and this is work I did 8 years ago, and it had never been able to get traction, but holding men's group, I don't know if you find it, but there are more and more men's groups out there, and it's gaining traction. I see women's groups are growing at an exponential rate. They're getting together to be able to talk. Women share much more than men ever do. You know that. And if it's younger men, you're not going to share at all. So being able to hold the space for a men's group, or at least a space where men can talk, even if it's a friend. I've counseled a few men whose wives have had breast cancer, and I've counseled them through that process about how they feel, what to look forward to, have you thought about this? Even something as simple as a go bag. I don't know if you've ever had anybody who's been in critical care or has had problems. You always have a go bag. What's in a go bag? Everything you need. When when you call the ambulance, you pick up the go bag. You grab the list of medications out the refrigerator. They hand the ambulance, and you go. You don't run around trying to figure out what you need. You have it all done.
Right. Right.
So it's a lot of those simple things that somebody might not tell you that you can connect with when you have somebody who's gone through similar instances with you.
Well, I want to bring it back really quick because you touched on something really important about how men don't talk, don't share, and it's true. Men's groups are starting to get more popular. I'm in one here in the DC area, and we had a really incredible example of this, the fact that men don't share, because there's kind of a catch-22 around it, and it's basically that men don't share. We're taught not to share. We're taught to bottle everything in, and then because we don't observe any other men having issues or talking about their issues, and so there's this perception that, well, I'm the only one who's struggling because I don't hear anyone else talking about how they're struggling, and then that creates a shame cycle, which makes you feel even worse about yourself. And now not only are you dealing with the thing that you have a problem with, but you're also dealing with the shame surrounding the belief, the false belief that I'm the only one who's dealing with this, or I'm the only one who's struggling. And that's where men's groups are so powerful, because you get to have a group of people who maybe they're all going through the same thing, like you're talking about, where it's husbands or partners of women who are going through breast cancer, or maybe it's just a group of guys who all have a commonality of wanting to better themselves, wanting to grow. And we had this total happenstance last month in the men's group that I'm in, where maybe 6 months ago, I was going through a breakup, and I was really, really struggling with it. And I had texted the guy who ran the men's group, and to tell him, hey, this is what's going on, and that's not why I'm texting you. The reason I'm texting you is to let you know that I just had coffee with one of the other guys that I met in the men's group not 2 months ago, and I had no idea that he was exactly who I needed to talk to. I feel like myself for the first time in a week since she broke it off, right? And I was like, so what you're doing with the group, it's working. It's incredible. And he asked me if he could share that text to the group, in the group, and he read it word for word. And what do you know? But after he read it, 5 other guys in the group talked about how they were struggling with a breakup or a divorce, and no one knew. They hadn't brought it to the group. But by me opening up first, or, the guy who ran the group talking about how, I kind of view that as I opened up, even though it was him actually doing the talking. By me opening up first, that gave space to all the other guys who were struggling with the same thing to open up, and it was just this beautiful moment of like group healing and group recognition. And I think almost every single guy in that room was crying by the end of that conversation, because we've all been there, and it was really powerful. And that's the goal for this podcast, is just get men talking, get men sharing, so that guys out there know that they're not alone.
And I use the analogy of the first person on the dance floor. If you've ever gone to a reception, wedding reception, or anything else, I was always the first one on the dance floor, and my wife hated it. I said, "You're only going to be there. You're only going to be there 20 seconds to be the only one on the dance floor, because everyone else is waiting for someone else to get on the dance floor so they can go up there, or they can tell their partner, hey, somebody else is dancing, let's go." and it's breaking, and that's just breaking the ice. I would do it right away, and people go, "Oh, okay, it's good to dance. All right." It didn't matter what I looked like, and I'm an old white guy who can't dance, but it's you go out and you have fun, and it's the joy, and that's fear. That fear of being looked at, that fear of being the first, that fear. That's hard to break the ice, and what
Yeah.
I find is that if you ask the right question, which is what you're doing right now, when you ask the right question, you're going to get the right response. And that is, hey, me too. I always taught my daughters, if you want to know somebody's name, you give them yours first. You put out your hand and say, hi, I'm. If you want to know where somebody lives, you tell them, you give them the gift of yourself first. Because if you go up to somebody and say, hey, what's your name? What's the reaction going to be, right?
Right.
But if you give that part of yourself first, you're breaking the ice. You're letting them know, hey, I'm, and the normal response is, oh, well, my name is. And it is that same kind of connectedness in life that we have, that if you do it first, if you make that connection first, you never know where it's going to go. Some of the most incredible times in my life have been organic. They've been with no thought, no planning, no anything else, just happening.
Yeah.
And they're usually the best because they're spontaneous, because they're just free of expectation. Because we carry all those expectations. Let's be real. We carry those expectations around with us pretty well. We got a large bag that we carry on our back, and we're carrying them around. And it's like, hey, you want to do this? No. I don't want to do that. Because you have expectations of it. So I always call it the world of yes, the world of possible. Someone said to me, hey, you want to go to India? Now, I had never thought about going to India, ever. I had written in a book called Sacred Death, and it was about grief and being able to walk through it. And she was Indian, lived there, and she was bringing a group to India. And I had no inkling that I was going to go until I kept hearing, you're going. I'm like, no, I'm not going to India. No, you're going to India. No, I'm not going. And I kept getting this, the download in the back of my head. And finally, I looked at my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and she said, why aren't you going? I couldn't come up with a good reason why not. So I did, and it was just one of those 17 fantastic day kind of trips that I was in the Himalayas, I was at the Taj Mahal, I was in Delhi. It was an experience beyond anything I could dream of. And I just need to know that it's okay to say yes. And know that whatever comes down the line, I can handle it. No matter if it's money or time or circumstance, you make the best judgments and you just go for it. I've now written in 10 books, collaborations with Brave Healer Productions, with Laura DeFranco. And the reason I've done that is to share my story, share the work I do, so that there is a voice of someone saying, damn it, I've been there. It sucks, but there is a way through it. There is a way on the other side that you can be in a good place, that you can survive this, that you can make it through it. And that's why I do that, is that teaching moment, that understanding, so that people don't feel alone. And the reason I love collaborations is because you have 25 different authors, you have 25 points of view. And when you have this book like this, there will be at least 4 or 5 that you're going to go, oh my God, that is me. They're writing for me. And that's because you need those perspectives. You need that point of contact. You need, it's like reading Alice in Wonderland. When you're a child, it's very cartoonish, very, the characters. When you're a teenager, it means something else. When you're 30 years old, it means something else. And when you're 50, it means something else entirely. But it's the same story, the same words. But you're coming at it from a very different perspective. And so the books that we put out there, that Brave Healer does, touches people in different ways, and you never know where that point of contact is going to be. And that's why I continue to do that kind of work with writing, is someone somewhere felt like I just did, and I want them to know it's okay.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that answered my next question, actually, which was why get into doing this work as more of a facilitator or author in your case? Well, facilitator as well, practitioner.
I do mentor. Yeah, I do mentoring also. I've got 4 young gentlemen who are just turning 30. In fact, one reminds me so much of you, by the way. He's a trainer, very much into just the physicality of it, and feeling lost, and to be able to guide someone through those things, to be able to give them perspective. And in my sessions, I always give homework. And you look, what do you mean homework? Well, if you're doing the work, right, much like in school, if you're doing the work, you have something to focus on. You have a point of focus. And whether it's breathing techniques, whether it's being aware of something that you're doing that you want to be much more aware of, about being present, about judgment, about gratitude, about whatever it is that is lacking at that moment, to be able to focus on it, all of a sudden it becomes second nature, and you start doing it on a regular basis. And that's what I call turning practice into rituals. When you do habits, right? You get up, you do habits. You do the same thing every morning, right? You come in the door, you put your keys down, and you just kind of walk. You don't even think about it. You just put it in the same place. Well, you go to leave, and the keys aren't there. Wait a minute. Where did I put them? Hold on. I wasn't thinking about it, right? But when you are present and you notice what you're doing and how it is, it brings a different level of concentration. It brings a different perspective to what you're doing. And when you're present, you're much more of your authentic self, which is where we all want to be, right?
Yeah.
We all want to get back to here, to where we are supposed to be.
Yeah.
So I really want to commend you for doing the podcast. I love that you are just bringing to light different topics and putting it out there for men to listen to. There is not a whole lot, unless you listen to, some of the Campbell or any of the great philosophers of our time, Eckhart Tolle or any others. There aren't a lot of men who can speak on the subjects, and I think just being able to speak about them it's showing up, man. That's what most of life is just getting there and showing up.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there anything else you'd like to cover?
Yeah, I'm curious, how do you view the current shift in kind of masculine values or masculine presence, what it means to be a man and masculinity that's happening in society right now?
Women are finding their masculine side. I think that's fairly evident.
Yeah.
And in doing that, unfortunately, they're demonizing men. Women are finding their fighting spirit, their warrior selves, and most of the people in. If I have a Zoom and it's about spirituality or anything else, there's 27 women and 3 men. And because they're finding their voice, and I applaud that. I had daughters. I wanted them to have that. I wanted those things for them. I wanted them to be independent. I wanted them to be self-sufficient. I wanted them to be strong. But here's the problem, is that men are now demonized and they are put down. And it's hard to find that space, but we can walk, right? It's like, Okay, I'm a manly man. Yeah, but it's too much. Okay. So if I waver or if I give in, oh, you're just a wimp. Oh, wait a minute. There a line?
Yeah.
And and so that's where one of the things in that we're working on in the book is what are the rituals that we hold currently to become a man. In the old days, my dad's you went into the army. You went, college wasn't the thing. It was you went into the army. You went into the trades. You had this.
Right.
You had these kind of bookmarks where, okay, this is the next step, the next step, the next step. That doesn't hold true anymore. It used to be when churches were a bigger part of, and not to say that it isn't for a lot of people, but churches were a bigger part for 80, 90% of the population. And there were steps for whatever religion you were, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, to be able to say, okay, I become a man. There was these rituals, there were ceremonies, there were acknowledgments of, all right, now you are in the next step. You are more of. And those have disappeared. Faith-based has dissipated. And so now there's no benchmarks anymore. So how do we measure that? And I think that's where the confusion comes in this I found in the youngest generation, is that they don't understand what it means to be a man and how I should handle myself. And I mean, you can take it back all the way back to what are manners, what is consideration, what is gratitude, what is all of those things that we used to hold dear. Is it still out there? Absolutely. But I find that it's in young men who have very solid families behind them that didn't have chaos or dysfunction within them, and it's much tougher, much tougher to navigate. Just to let you know, I am very happy that I am not 25 years old right now. It would be a very tough world. As I said, I'm 67. I was born in 1957, which gives you a little perspective. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and there were certain expectations all the way around. When you got in trouble at school, not only did you get in trouble in school, but you get in trouble at home. And I worked for a school system, and when they get in trouble at school, the parents come and then they yell at the teacher, they yell at the principal, basically telling the kid they don't have to listen to them. So there's no accountability there.
Yeah.
There was, in my neighborhood, all of the moms could yell at you for doing something wrong. Didn't matter who they were. If you were doing something wrong, any of the moms in the neighborhood would yell at you. Back then, dads went to work, moms stayed home. And all the moms knew one another. If I did something wrong, my mother would know about it before I got home. So it was that kind of, but that was the kind of neighborhood. Now I find that most people don't know who their neighbors are two doors down from them. In any direction, there isn't that sense of neighborhood. There isn't that sense of connectivity. There's that sense of connectedness. Hey, we're all in this together. So it's very fragmented. The other part of that is that multi-generational families have fallen off. It used to be, my dad always told me the story that he went over from supper and his grandfather died on the couch. He found his grandfather dead. His grandfather was living with his family. That was the norm. When you go to Asia, there are always 3 generations living together. 3 generations. The grandparents retire to take care of the children so the mother and father can go work. So there is a continuation of ethics, of upbringing, of tradition, of respectfulness that no longer lies there as the families have gotten fragmented. So in answer to the question, I don't think it's easy to put the blame anywhere. But I think that with the coming consciousness of women finding their male part of them, their masculine part, I found that men, to be a better man is to find your heart. Now we think of that as the feminine, sacred feminine. It's tough for me to walk up to a 300 pound biker and tell him that he's got to find his heart. I've had these discussions, and they've told me to, in no uncertain terms, that what I should do with the thought. But I found as I've gotten older that I am more fully a man because I have that vulnerability, that compassion, that understanding, so that I don't know all the answers, that I listen more carefully, that I am more present with all of my relationships, that I do what I can when I can. I have always felt that I have been, no matter what my life situation, that I have had abundance. I've always had a roof over my head. I've always had food. I've always had a car. I've always had insurance. I've always had those things. I've worked my ass off for them, but I've always had them, and I felt that I had abundance. So when anybody came into my world that didn't have those things, I made sure I tried to provide them in some form or fashion. So it's looking out for other people. It's giving of yourself. It's as you get older, you realize that part of your life is for service. That you are not singular. That you are part of a larger community. That you you have gifts and you should share them, however that shows up.
Definitely. Yeah, I've come to the same conclusion, same understanding as I've grown and as I've like gone through my own healing and growth journey. I would agree that one of the biggest parts of being a man is giving, is being of service to others, but there's a fine line where you can't lose yourself in the service to others. I think this is the trap that a lot of men fall into, and something that I used to fall into myself up until just a few years ago, is I was so focused on serving others and making sure everyone else was good that I left nothing for myself. And then when I found myself in an abusive relationship and I gave everything to that, when it ended, I was lost. I was completely lost because I had no foundation of self-identity, because everything that was me was service to others. So I think there's a balance, there's a fine line. We need to, I think being of service to others is really important, but I also think that it's really crucial to have a base level foundation of self.
Absolutely. By the way, you and I both have done the same thing. When my relationship ended with my wife when she passed, I was bereft of anything that was me. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I was, because I had been in service for all of my adult life. And it wasn't until then that I was able to pick up and start understanding who I was, and liking the guy in the mirror.
Yeah.
That's a key component.
Yeah, that's huge. There was something else you said, and I'll tie it back to something you said at the very beginning as well. You mentioned, maybe not in these exact words, but you mentioned rites of passage, initiation ceremonies, and these types of things that for a very, very long time, the entirety of human history up until the last generation or two, was how a boy became a man, both in the eyes of society and to himself. And we've by and large lost that. You know, when I was growing up, and I'm 32, so when I was growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, you know, there was still the Eagle Scouts, there was the Boy Scouts and the Eagle Scouts, and that was one way. There was the religious ceremonies, and you know, I was raised Catholic, I was confirmed, I had lots of friends that were Jewish and had mitzvahs, but even that, when you take a class, if you're Jewish, you learn how to speak Hebrew. You take on a new name. If you're Catholic, you do this big ceremony and everybody gives you money. And then what? You're just supposed to be a man? Like, there's no actual transformative journey to become a man, which is how I want to tie it back to something you said at the beginning. You said around when you were 25, and I think it was when your daughter passed. You said
When she got sick initially, yep.
when she got sick, you said you had to come to terms with your own powerlessness and relinquish control to God, to the universe, whatever, higher power you believe in. And I've done a little bit of studying of historic rites of passage, and that's one of the consistent themes throughout, is that traditionally these ceremonies would put the boy in a position where he had to relinquish his control, he had to relinquish all power, and just say, okay, I'm going to do what I can, but this situation is out of my control, and either I'll make it or I won't, and whatever happens, I give myself to the situation, I give myself to the universe. And that, for you, even though it wasn't in an organized way, that experience for you was that trial. That was the rite of passage for you. And for me, it was the abusive relationship of I hit a point where I just had to relinquish control when I got out of that relationship of just like, I'm going to do the best I can, but I don't really know where to go from here. So, and I think we've lost a systematized way of doing that. It doesn't exist anymore, at least not that I've seen. There are a lot of people who will go through experiences like you did or like I did, but it's completely randomized. And there's almost never someone to help guide you through that experience. There's no guru, there's no elder to help you through that experience. You just kind of figure it out. And that's one of the things that I really fascinate myself with in this space. And it's something that, as I move forward and grow into this space, it's something that I want to address with, I'm not really sure what, but retreat course, something along those lines, because I think the world needs that.
You're absolutely right. Herein lies the problem. As you know, when you are going through a traumatic instance where basically you lose your mortality, and I always looked at it at that point in my life where I wasn't immortal anymore. That I wasn't going to live forever. And when someone is going through it, they go into survival mode, because everything they knew, everything they understood, all of a sudden gets stripped away. That's when they need someone the most, and that's where they become least able to reach out each and every time.
Yeah.
So it always reminds me of if a child dies tragically in an elementary school or a middle school, and they send in a bunch of counselors and ask the kids, we're going to be here. Kids don't understand. The kids don't understand necessarily how to speak it. They don't understand how to process it. They don't understand any of that, and they don't understand how to ask for help. Much like you and
Yeah.
I, they internalize it, right?
Yeah.
So someone who's going through that at that moment doesn't know how to ask for help, or who to ask for help, or even how to go. When my daughter was first brought home, she was multiply handicapped, and I ended up working with the state, and I helped them write handicap legislation. But I said, it'd be great for every parent that has a child that's multiply involved. There's a handbook, and it's like, here are your rights. Here's all the different organizations that can help you. Here's all the government. This is what they can give you. This is what you can do. This is what you can expect. Nobody, and I mean nobody, has that or gives it to you when you are trying to get services for your child. You are on the phone with multiple agencies all the time. You are trying to do the best you can, and you're by yourself.
Yeah.
So it's in that same aspect when someone is in that space, it's always hard to ask for help, to know where to ask for help, to be able to do that. I applaud you for wanting to be that, and I have struggled myself with that same aspect of how can you be there for someone who needs it. And the other aspect is they have to allow it.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part. I help clients all the time because they're looking for answers. But they have to allow that they really truly want to change and what they're going to do that, to make that change happen. And they have to allow themselves to go in uncomfortable, unfamiliar, and strange places in order to do that. And that's where much like yourself, where you kind of test yourself, much like you're doing now with boxing. You push yourself into those spaces, even though it isn't necessarily comfortable.
Yeah.
Have you talked about that?
About the boxing?
Yes.
I haven't talked about it yet because it's been a minute since I've recorded a podcast. But so I'm competing in Haymakers for Hope, which is a charity boxing match to fundraise and raise money for cancer research. And as you were talking about your experience with your wife, I actually drew a lot of parallels to my sister, because the reason that I'm doing this, the motivating factor is about 2 months ago my sister was diagnosed with thyroid cancer, and thankfully they caught it early. And thyroid cancer is one that we know pretty well, and it's a pretty routine procedure. She got the thyroid cut out. We're waiting to hear back from the panel of cancer experts at the hospital to see if she needs to go on radioactive iodine. But even if she does, she's gonna be fine. But it's still the C word. It's still one of the most terrifying diagnoses you can get. When you hear that word, there's just that moment of oh my God, and I kind of struggled with this idea of control, and this idea of I'm her older brother. Everything we learn, society, all these things, I'm supposed to be able to protect her, right? That's the narrative. That's what we learn.
Yep.
I can't do shit. There is nothing that I can do, and that was something that I really struggled with right at the beginning when we found out. So I think when I found out about Haymakers, it was a couple weeks after we got the diagnosis, and it was just, I need to do this. There was not a single moment of hesitation or doubt in my mind. It was just, I need to do this. This is something that I need to do.
It's scary. It's scary not having control, isn't it?
It's really scary not having control.
And I'm just gonna kind of change it just a little bit, a couple notches, and that
Sure.
There are things you can do, and that is to be there for her in any way that you can.
Yeah.
That, I'm sure, would mean the world to her. The ability for you to be there for her, to show up for her, is what you can control and what you can do, and probably has more of a direct positive impact than you'll ever know.
Yeah, definitely. And that is something that when we got that news, I talked to her, I think like every day for that first week. Like I called her,
Mm-hmm.
just to talk, just so, you know, hey, what's going on? How are you? Like, how you feeling? You know, I think just to check in and make sure she knew she wasn't alone in what she was dealing with.
And how are
So
you doing with it now?
better now. I didn't really know what to think for the first maybe week or two. It didn't really hit me, and then it really hit me. And I was struggling with it for a couple of weeks. I mean, I kind of made my peace with it, and then luckily they got her in for surgery really quick. So we got the news. We got to a point where it was like, okay, medically she's going to be fine. We got to that point pretty quick. I think it was within a month of the diagnosis. So that definitely relieved a lot of the stress once we got to that point. But yeah.
Yeah, it's that's the hard part. The hardest part, much like if you have a death in the family or you lose somebody, that first couple weeks, everybody's around.
Yeah.
That next 6 months, not so much.
That
And
taper
so
off.
it always tapers off, right? Because of the immediacy of it.
Yeah.
So just understand, she's going to have stuff happening 2 months, 4 months, 6 months out that you may or may not see. But she still needs to know that you are still there in the same way. And that's I think what a lot of people miss is that kind of, it takes for especially with chemotherapy or anything else you do, for the length of time that it say it takes 6 months of therapy. It's going to take her a year after that before she gets back to zero, to even. And then from there she can build on it. But it takes such a strain on the body. And so that's when, at those different points, she's going to need your words, your voice, your hugs in the same way. And I just want to put that out there, that, it's the immediacy of it. And I used to do the same thing. Something's wrong, I jump, I take care of it, okay, and then be on to the next. The problem is that there is so much after the fact.
Yeah.
Amadeus, you are surprising always. I really want to thank you for having me on today. It was enlightening. Thank you for the ability to tell some of my story. I hope that those that are listening, if you have something that's hit home, they can always reach out to either yourself or myself. If you're in times of trouble, sometimes it's a 5-minute conversation that can alleviate some of that anxiety. Ask for guidance, ask for help, and sometimes you just need somebody to sit there quietly and have a cup of coffee with you. It makes the difference.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for telling your story. It's an incredible story. I had no idea what direction this was going to go, and it was great from start to finish. It was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in. It was such a privilege and a pleasure to talk with Scott. And during this conversation, you may have noticed I stayed pretty quiet. I did that on purpose because Scott has so much life experience and so much wisdom that he brings to the table and he brings to conversations like this. And I really wanted to just give him the floor to say what he wanted to say, because Scott is one of the things that I talk about a lot on this podcast is this idea of elders in our society and how there is a vacancy of elders. I think it's such an important topic that I named the show after it. So we have this vacancy of elders, and I think that Scott really embodies this idea of elder. He is someone who clearly has been through a lot of life experience, who has gone deep within himself. He's done the internal work. He's faced his demons. He's come back, and he's now able to bring that wisdom from facing those demons and from going and doing the inner work. And he's able to bring that wisdom to helping other men, helping younger men do the same thing themselves, embark on that inner work journey. And so I just wanted to allow Scott the space to say everything he wanted to say. Now, I have a couple things before I close out. First off, as Scott talked about, he is writing a book. He's writing a book where he's interviewing 200 men over the age of 30 about this idea of when they became men, when they became a man, or if they have yet become a man, and what this idea means about being a man. He has a list of questions that he's ready to ask you. It's really professional. It's really well organized. It's really streamlined, as I talked about with him. And I was one of the men that he interviewed, and he is still looking for more men to interview. So if you are a man who is over the age of 30 and you would like to participate in this interview process for this book that he's writing, just send him an email. I am including his email address into the show notes. So just go into the show notes, find his email address, copy paste, shoot him an email, let him know that you heard about it from me, that you saw the Male Vacancy Project podcast or you listened to it and you'd like to be part of it. And he'll set up a time to interview. It's a really cool experience. It took about 15 minutes to a half hour, so it's really not a huge time commitment. And as he said, anonymity is something that he cares about. They are only using first names. So unless you're like me and you have a really recognizable first name, it will be anonymous. So if you want to be part of it, send him an email. The second thing that I want to say is talk about sacred spaces. So this is the book that I wrote a chapter in the winter, and that we talked about here on the podcast with Scott. So the book is called Sacred Spaces, Volume 3. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. This is 25 authors came together. Each one of us got about 3,000 words, which is roughly 8 to 10 pages, something like that, to tell our story, or tell a story, talk about what we learned, and then share some wisdom and provide a practice to help someone who might be going through something similar. So my chapter was about getting out of an abusive relationship and how that was really one of the most formative moments in my life, where I suffered what I learned to call an ego death, and I had to build myself back up from the rubble and figure out what kind of man I wanted to be and how I wanted to show up in the world. And a big part of that for me was talking about this idea of what it means to be a man and what masculinity means in the modern world. So the title of my chapter is The Male Vacancy Project: Unmasking Masculinity for the Modern Man. So if you're interested, please check it out. 2 places really you can get it, either, or maybe 3. You can definitely find it on Amazon. I'll include the link in the show notes. I believe Barnes & Noble has it, and I know a lot of local bookstores will carry it as well or have the ability to get it. So if you're someone who cares about supporting local business, I definitely am. Go to your local bookstore, see if they have it. Again, Sacred Spaces, Volume 3. See if they have it, see if they can get it, if they don't have it, and if they can't, you can always find it on Amazon. Again, the link to the Amazon page for the book is in the show notes. And then the third and final thing that I want to talk about is the boxing match. So I talked about with Scott, Haymakers for Hope is a charity boxing match to raise money for cancer research. It is happening September 25th, 2025 here in Washington, D.C., where I live. I was supposed to compete in it. However, since filming this podcast with Scott, I have suffered a concussion, and between my doctor and the Haymakers for Hope team and myself, we have decided that it's just not safe for me to compete. Getting punched in the head willingly is not the best idea when you had a concussion a few months ago. Go figure. So I'm not going to be able to compete in Haymakers for Hope, unfortunately. The good news is that the concussion was not boxing related. I had a weight fall on my head in the weight room. And so because it's not boxing related, I always have the ability to go and do it next year if I decide that that's what I want to do. But I'm going to let myself take some time and decide on that later. But that being said, it was never about me. It was never even about the fight. It was always about just raising money, raising awareness for cancer research. And if that is something that is near and dear to my heart, because as we talked about, my little sister was diagnosed with thyroid cancer this spring. And if that's something that you care a lot about, if cancer is something that's affected you and your family or your friends or someone you know, and you would like to donate, you're no longer able to donate to my fundraising campaign, but there are over 20 other fighters who will be competing on September 25th at Haymakers for Hope here in DC. And I do encourage you to go and find another fighter to donate to their fundraising campaign. Every single one of us is stepping into the ring for a reason. Every single one of us is fighting for a reason. Every single person who is fighting has a story. They have been affected by cancer in some way. A family member had it, a friend had it, something like this, right? And so every single one of them would appreciate a donation. And here's the thing. When we signed up for Haymakers for Hope, we committed to raising $10,000 for cancer research. So what I encourage you to do is go to the Haymakers for Hope page with the list of fighters in the DC event. Find someone who has not yet hit their $10,000 mark. Donate to their campaign. If you want to, read their story, read their bio, look at their pictures. Like I said, everyone has a story that connects them to this fight in some way. I encourage you to go and donate to some of their pages. And if you are in the DC area and you would like to attend the fight, tickets are officially on sale. I will be there. It's going to be a great time. I've heard only the best about the energy in that building when Haymakers for Hope shows up and puts on the fights. And then final thing, if you have not yet, please write a review. Please subscribe to the show. It really helps the show when we get reviews. The more followers we get, the more the algorithm gets boosted. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Please share the show, share this episode, share another episode with someone who you think would either benefit from the episode or who you think would enjoy it. And write a review if you haven't already. It could be about this episode. It could be about another episode specifically. It could be just about the show in general. It would really help the show, and I would really appreciate it. That's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, Amadeus signing off.